Yes, and we have come almost to the end of the conference, so it's time to give the floor to a person who has patiently made notes during the whole conference to summarize it in a set of conclusions and recommendations. This person is our rapporteur, Jeff Hearn from Örebro University.
Hello, everybody. Can you, I trust you can hear me.
We can.
Good. Okay. I'll just proceed. Well, let me first say, I'm obviously delighted to be able to, given this opportunity, this privilege of trying to talk about this amazing conference in 20 minutes. And last night I did a quick count, and I think there are about 67 people been presenting from 28 countries. And so you'll get 20 seconds per person and 45 seconds per country. And what I'm going to say is a kind of mixture of what's been sent in various documents, summaries from the various workshops, and obviously previous documents, and also my own following of the whole conference. And I was asked to talk about conclusions and recommendations. If you go to the next slide, I'm actually going to change it round, recommendations and conclusions. A radical move, no doubt. Okay, cool. And the next slide. And I think it's important to say there are a number of really basic principles here about engaging men and boys in gender equality, in the sense this is part of a bigger, broader gender equality strategy and program. And also it's very important to actually reassert, when talking about men and boys, we're talking about diverse people, intersectionally, gender and sexuality diverse people, and we're talking at the same time about what we might call structural conditions and context, privilege, practical actions, and change in behavior, as was discussed in the last session. Next slide. And obviously, one of the main things that's come up in both the panels and the workshop is the question of care. Care has been a theme throughout the whole of this conference. It is the theme. And care, of course, means many different things. It involves active caring, active fathering, shared parenting. And I'm just going to mention a few points here that have been raised in the various sessions. I mean, one is basically to change the practices of men distancing themselves from care, from women, from family, to extend care leave, to work more flexibly, to actually have non-transferable leave, to look at the legal rights of employers and how this relates to gender pay gap, to look at issues around care after separation and divorce and how this is part of gender equality policies, and in many, in a very broad way, to actually refocus the economy to increase support for care and education. These are some of the things that have been repeated in different sessions. Next slide. And this also, of course, is mirrored, you might say, in terms of professional paid care work. And I couldn't attend the workshop yesterday on this, so this is simply coming from some of the feedback from the workshop. The task of increasing men in professional care work, how that can be done, how men and boys can be attracted into the care sector, how boys can be encouraged to think about that as career options, to empower care professionals, to improve working conditions, and also to improve self-care and professionals, and how this also links to actually different kinds of masculinities. We don't always do that, as we've heard many times. Next slide, please. Violence, an absolutely central question, as reaffirmed in the last panel, which I heard most of. Stopping violence at all levels, zero tolerance, changing the conditions of violence, enforcing law and regulations and policy, as well as education and rehabilitation. And the question of the Istanbul Convention, Article 16, has been raised several times, and the need for countries to actually do preventative intervention and treatment programs, as well as raising questions of violence throughout the education system and including training and activism against violence. I mean, these are absolutely central questions that cannot be avoided. They're absolutely fundamental. And then we could say, switching back to the panel yesterday, which I think was particularly interesting, the question of online hate speech, anti-gender, misogynist, cyber violence, and so on. And the whole question of challenge and change the situation, to do preventative interventions, to actually look at which men and boys get involved in these online movements, looking at the dangers of men-only, homosocial, misogynist spaces, and how they actually have been used and misused by right-wing authoritarian politics and politicians. So again, how to actually get away from that. And again, this also includes, as with violence more generally, law reform and strengthening regulation, including with the Council of Europe. Very quickly, moving on to the question of age, something that concerns me quite a lot. One could say that questions of age and aging have been somewhat neglected in this area of work. And they raise some quite big challenges. How can men, as they get older, how they continue to do gender equal care and gender equal activism as well, how to engage men, old men who are very isolated, in some cases living alone and so on, how to create suitable spaces for older men. Should they be gender specific or should they not be, I think is a real big question. And then we have some very broad questions. Sandy Ruxton couldn't give his presentation, but I'm just taking from his document that you will see in due course, the importance of looking at senior levels of organizations, the importance of looking at government initiatives and clear public statements, and the importance of states to give the good reasons why men and boys should support gender equality. And this links to the last panel, which unfortunately I couldn't hear all of, but this also reiterates some of the points made by Gary Barker around power, privilege and cost, harmful restricted masculinities, challenging the myth that gender equality has been achieved, looking at care beyond parental leave, and looking at conservative backlash and vulnerabilities, and the importance of institutional action. Okay, that was a very quick tour, but there are two very big areas just to finish off my last 5 or 6 minutes, I think. One is the question of men caring for environmental sustainability. And this has been the focus of the first keynote from Kadri Arvik. And also, this has obviously been a major focus in the previous panel this morning. And this is a hugely urgent question. I can't emphasize that too much. And I think Kadri's presentation made this such strong case for the promotion of gender equality policies and practices in terms of men, gender, humans and non-humans, and putting the question of food and sustainability central here, and of course used the example of veganism as a practical step forward. And again, this morning, Martin Holtman went further on that theme, looking at ecological masculinities and eco-suicidal logic, the Anthropocene, and the movement from linear economies to circular economy. I mean, these are massive questions, macro questions around extraction, water, transport, energy, climate change, the oceans, and so on. I mean, this has to be put much, much more central. I hope it's central in future conferences. My final attempt, in my last minute or two in this very rapid tour, is what I've called some cross-cutting conclusions. It's all the C's. I decided to go for C's. Continuity. This is now, as was said in the last panel, this has been a long-running discussion going over many decades now, certainly since Beijing 1995. Care, again, of course, means many different things, from care of the planet to interpersonal care and so on. The importance of another C is context and the social conditions that actually affect these questions, the importance of commitment, and also connecting up the various 6 or 7 or 8 issues we've just highlighted. They are interconnected, but there are some contradictions and there are a need for some caution in some cases, not to reposition men and boys at the center, as I've said, but to think about gender equality broadly. There's a question of cash and resources, which perhaps haven't been raised as much as it could be. Challenges around corporations, capitalism, colonialism, and of course, COVID. And the last thing I would say is around a question of change. Things are changing at all sorts of different levels. Not only the changing of men and boys and masculinity, but the agenda we're talking about, I think, is changing quite fast. Most obviously, perhaps in terms of the environmental questions been raised, sustainability, and the online cyber virtual world. And I think including what I would call the problematic aspects of man masculinities in policy, state policy, local policy, is something also that has to be done, including, I hope, in this EU document that was mentioned also this morning by our colleague Alonso. Thank you very much. That's my little quick tour of 67 speakers in 20 minutes. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jeff, for this concise summary. The slides will be made available among the other materials for you to have a quick conspect or a small summary of the event.